I'm Sky, and I am a contributor to on-chain collectives, and you can find me in some some uh, communities like DXDAO, Metacartel, DAO House, and Public Nouns. And I'm going to talk about why on-chain matters. And I think I have half an hour, so it might be a little fast, but hopefully it should be fine. Uh, so, what's going on these days? There's some cool AI stuff happening. You got cool AI graphics. I think this was AI. Here's another one, holiday time AI generated graphics. And so I figured instead of having to give the presentation myself, I could just, use AI. So I asked our friend Chat GPT to write a paragraph about why on-chain matters. And you can see here, it's actually pretty good. It talks about transparency, immutability, security, trust, and efficiency of the network. All very important things. Yeah, very crucial. All characteristics that we all like. All important for improving our world, making better systems. Um, so that's great. However, um, what's missing from that? And I think, yeah, one of the most important things. So if we just, before I get into that, let's look at like what else is going on in the world and in the space. And so here's just a handful of examples, and this is mainly just from the Web3 crypto space. This isn't from the rest of the world, but we have over the last, I think this is over just the last year, we have all of these problems like DNS attacks, front ends compromised, multi-sig bridges being compromised, more multi-sigs having problems, more domain hijackings, more multi-sig problems, more front-end problems, sanctions on certain protocols and actions by people. And then most recently, an example, and there's lots of other ones like this, but big problems with, yeah, a centralized exchange trying to take down our entire space, which is a problem. And what do all of these things have in common? Guessed it. They all have weak points of centralization. So all of those problems that I just went through basically came about from centralization or weak points of centralization. I mean, there's a lot of other problems in the world with centralized things like data being hacked of every centralized database in the world. Like that's this, there's many other problems that we can get into. These were just Web3 crypto examples. So, yeah, you can guess what is my talk about? Decentralization. So, the title of the talk is why on-chain matters, but the actual point of the talk is decentralization. And so, decentralized versus centralized systems, very easy for people to understand in the world. Like when we explain to our families and things at Christmas or at the holidays this coming upcoming, it's easy to show them examples why centralization sucks. They're all going to ask you about FTX. They're going to ask you about your things you're doing in the space. It's a little harder to explain to someone why decentralization is good, but we do know that the opposite of centralized is decentralized. So we're kind of making an assumption that centralized systems suck. So how do we get systems, decentralized systems, and systems built that are actually decentralized? Again, asked our friend ChatGPT, why is centralization bad? Some good answers: lack of transparency and accountability, vulnerable to tampering, censorship, reduced freedom and autonomy for the users, negative effects on transparency, accountability, freedom, efficiency, and resilience. All really good explanation of why centralization is bad in case you have trouble explaining it, but I think it's pretty easy to explain why centralization causes problems. Here's some simple examples. What's easier to attack? Spam in his exchange, a single person, a small group of people that get to make the decisions or control something, or the opposite, which is large group or like the people or a decentralized collective um, or the public, basically, which is easier to attack. So like, we know the answer to that. And so the key, yeah, this is a key term that decentralization is our defense mechanism. So all of the problems that come with centralized systems, actual way to solve it is via decentralization. And that's why it's so important. Here we get into, yeah, now that yeah, most of us here understand that, more and more people will understand that. And so here are the things that we basically desire and what we need. We want to bring decentralization to a lot of the important things we do. So that includes decentralized coordination, decentralized control of capital, decentralized ownership, decentralized blank. And you can put, social media, you can put data, you can fill in that blank with many different things. And I believe that you cannot achieve any of these decentralized things without using blockchain. Blockchain, with the invention of Bitcoin and then Ethereum and all the other ones we have, and some are more and less decentralized, but they're the tool that we basically needed. And without this tool of the blockchain, basically every system has to have centralized points, and those are centralized points of failure. So I was trying to think of one, and I really can't. There may be some from nature, but I don't. Can anyone give me one example of a human-based productive system that doesn't have centralized points of failure without using blockchain? And so it seems to me, and yeah, maybe people could raise their hand if they have one, but I can't think of one.
But
Seems to
Yes.
the only one I can think of is memes.
Um, yeah, that's yeah,
Okay,
memes.
there are others. Eleanor Ostrom studied about this. So there are systems of sharing fish resources along the river by five different tribes, which has happened for over 100 years with no centralized authority, with social agreements between five different units of agency without a centralized power, and they nobody overfarmed the fishes. So it has happened, and somebody won a Nobel Prize for proving that they did. She was the second woman to win a Nobel Prize in economics. And remember, there are 93 or 94 given out so far. So it is possible, yes.
That's a good example. So I mean, that's almost, yeah. In nature, I think there are some examples. I mean, I guess you were saying that's a human-based system leveraging nature and memes. Yeah, some good examples. We can keep those in mind. Um, for let's say most all human-based productive systems. Yeah. And so for me, on-chain matters because it allows us to do things in a decentralized manner. And in general, I believe you can't have almost all decentralized systems without blockchain. And so let's return to these three important examples: coordination, control of capital, and ownership. So we're all probably familiar with decentralized coordination. This is what DAOs are being used for. Most of us here are in DAOs. There's some, yeah, terms. There's a whole spectrum of DAOs. Some of us, I call things like fake DAOs versus proper DAOs. Um, I'm not saying they're not all DAOs, but in my mind, if your vote doesn't action, your vote doesn't matter. So there can be communities and there can be people coordinating in Discord, but at the end of the day, um, if what you say and what you vote on doesn't actually take an action, in the end it might not matter, or it often won't matter. And so making sure that that is part of the system you're in is important. And so yeah, using blockchain for that is quite important. Um, Decentralized control of capital, that's ownership, management, and distribution of capital. That's something we're all quite familiar with, whether that's giving out grants, using that capital for investments, spending it to build things. That is doing that in a decentralized manner is very powerful. And then this next one, which is decentralized ownership. And in the whole world, um, we haven't really had for a long time the ability to have decentralized ownership of something. Like, even if you have stocks in some system or a cooperative, there's usually some centralized thing, like a legal document in a jurisdiction that allows you to have that ownership. So even if you decentralize that, there's often a centralized point in there that makes the whole system centralized. And so with blockchain, we can actually have truly decentralized ownership. And so that can be ownership of capital, that can be ownership of assets such as like digital NFTs and things. And then we have ownership of products. In this case, I'm mainly talking about digital products because owning physical things in the world is harder. But I'm talking about mainly the digital world here, and specifically the Web3 world. Um, and so we have some examples of protocols in the space, like for example, Uniswap protocol is owned by Unit Token. We have some products, we could have a lot more that are products like Swapper, which is an AMM built by DXDAO, which is a decentralized collective, and that product, the actual product, is owned by the collective, and it uses ENS for that. If you want to get into like deep details of, you know, decentrally owned products, I've given some talks and presentations on what I'm calling unconquerable product ownership. DAOs can do this. Yeah, collectives can do this. These are digital products that can be owned by a decentralized organization. And so just to go into more of this one example, because most people here are familiar with DAOs and decentralized distribution of capital, but decentralized ownership of a product is a little more unique and maybe harder to understand, and it's now possible because we have blockchain. But to have a decentralized product, um, you actually need blockchain, but you have all of these parts of a product. You have the code, you have the back end, you have the front end, you have the access, how people are accessing the product, and then you have the actual ownership of each of those parts. And the question is, can those also all be decentralized? And this example, you actually need this, what I call a toolbox. Without all of these things, and blockchain being one of them, but they're all very important. This is the toolbox that allows you to have and own a digital product, basically. The internet, blockchain, Ethereum, tools for decentralized coordination like DAOs, ENS, IPFS, and decentralized code storage. So just really quickly to run through some of these. And I think the risks are really interesting because it just shows, it highlights like centralized versus decentralized, but there's always still risks involved. And so, we obviously need the internet. There's certain places in the world where the internet is shut down or censored. So I would say that the open internet is what you need. Like in China, um, that's not the open internet, and they can they can shut down that. There's a centralized switch where they can turn on and off things. So that's a problem. Uh, we need blockchains, which is what this presentation is about. Without blockchains on the internet, we can't do any of the next stuff. the risk here is some blockchains are actually decentralized and good. There's a lot of blockchains out there that may not actually be um, decentralized enough, or um, if they're not decentralized enough, they can, or if they appear to be decentralized, but they're all controlled by one, some people argue Binance chain, like most of the nodes are controlled by a group of people. Uh, that's also a problem. So blockchains not being decentralized would be not a good blockchain to use. The one I think most of us here prefer to use and doing a lot of the most interesting stuff is the Ethereum blockchain, um, which allows for applications with immutable code, which is really important because that's the back end that has to be centrally hosted. Um, Risk is that Ethereum gets attacked, I guess. Uh, the tools for decentralized coordination, super important. This is the whole DAO space, DAO tooling, the DAOs that we're in. Really, we want these to be on chain, and we want these to be decentralized, and we want to eliminate as many centralized points of failure in these systems as well. And if you do use centralized sacrifices in the systems and tools you're building, those centralized, if you have backup, so as long if like the centralized DNS gets hacked, but there's a backup that's you can access in a safe decentralized way, that is better than if you just have a centralized way to access the stuff. So you can always have redundancy um, by having more than one way to get to do something that you need to do, basically. The risk here is that some of these tools don't work, or they have centralized points of failure. Um, for this decentralized product ownership, ENS, which is now one of the most popular favored applications or tools in the Ethereum space, is really important for this. Um, it's actually without this, there isn't a way for decentralized on-chain collective to own an actual working product, I don't think. And then we have this, which is not a blockchain, but it's a decentralized network. Probably be more decentralized and incentivized to be decentralized. But this is also an important tool in a decentralized product. And then we also everyone can store their code on their own computers in a peer-to-peer decentralized way. There's systems like Radical and Source that are making it easier for decentralized code storage, which is really important because the code is what working on the code before you deploy it to Ethereum is super important. And if you keep that in a centralized place, it can be uh, attacked or taken down or blocked, basically. Um, what else is important? We see some bumps along the way. Even once we have decentralized products, you still have to get to them, and there's ways for everyone to get to them, but it's not easy. And so we do generally count on some centralized methods to make it easier to get to those products. However, um, and there's also censoring going on. So censoring RPCs not allowing you to get to certain things, but there are solutions to this. It's kind of harder. How do you solve this? We also need decentralized infrastructure. And so that is becoming more popular, but in the future, we're probably going to need, way more people to make sure we have decentralized infrastructure, you can help by running your own nodes. That's Ethereum nodes, that's IPFS nodes, that's any nodes in any of the networks that we are using and being dependent on. So super important. Um, so what can you do as a as an individual? We all are kind of aware of most of this stuff. Everyone here is on the the more expert side. There's a lot of people in the space that could do a lot more on this, but we can practice decentralization. We don't just talk about it, but we need to take action and we need to show others how to take action. Instead of just telling people, like, don't leave your money on centralized exchanges, we need to actually show them and walk them through it. Instead of saying, your DAO is on Discord, that's fine for now. Like progressive decentralization in the future, like that's like a weak answer. Like you actually need to like it today. You have to show others how to do it, and you lead by example. So you have to be very aware of any sacrifices you are making. Like people are making sacrifices on decentralization because it's really hard. So you're doing things in a centralized manner in certain places, but be aware of that you're doing that and try to stop doing that as soon as possible. Do more on chain. Like, yeah, on chain matters because that is what allows decentralized solutions. So you have to, even if you don't want to, do more on chain. We don't do it now. No one's gonna figure out how to do it. So we need to all do it, and we need to push others to do it. Sometimes it's harder. A lot of times it is the harder way, but you have to do it. And always, when possible, lean more towards the decentralized version. And we're gonna see if this can, yeah, can all work. And then once we get it, figure out how it works, we can get everyone else in the world to do it as well. And some people are like, well, how do you do this? That's too hard. That sounds really hard. Well, we already have tools for decentralized way. Um, Obviously here at DAOcember and DAO like DAO and DAO V3, which is coming out, like awesome. You can, have on-chain decentralized communities and collectives doing pretty much everything you want to do. So check it out. At DXDAO, we have been doing on-chain for 3 years now. And depending on other people's products, we've built some of our own front ends products, and we're also building more. Project Davi, which is a decentralized on-chain framework for DAOs as well, um, is coming out now, and it will get better and better. And then even in the NFT world, you have things like Nouns DAO. Like there are lots of NFT projects that are not doing anything on chain, like the NFTs on chain, but none of their governance, none of their management, none of their treasuries on chain. But then you have examples like Nouns DAO where it is on chain, the art is on chain, the NFT is on chain, the treasury is on chain, the governance is on chain. You can do stuff on chain and it's working, and it's the Nouns DAO is managing a lot of money clearly, and this is all on chain, and so like the excuse of on chain is too hard is not good anymore. Like we've come really far in the last few years, and a lot of people have built tools that work for on-chain governance. And even if you don't want to do it on mainnet, put on another chain that you prefer, but at least, and it's cheaper and fun when it's not on mainnet. I mean, mainnet's not too expensive to do on-chain governance right now, but make your on-chain governance cheap, fun, and get people, doing it basically. Um, yeah, thanks everyone for listening. Then last thing here, as I went back to Chat GPT, just so if everyone was curious, I don't know if everyone knew what GPT stands for, but it stands for Generative Pre-trained Transformers. I'm not sure what that means, but most people just probably didn't know what that means. So I thought it was interesting. How does decentralization? So I had to prompt because GPT didn't mention decentralization when I asked why on-chain matters, but clearly you can, in my presentation, you can see why the most important thing is the decentralization part. And so how does decentralization factor into why on-chain matters? And it seemed to understand and answer pretty nicely and correctly. Um, I just had to basically prompt it to make that jump. But it's proof that it's true, I guess, according to AI. So yeah, that's everything. I don't know if anyone has any questions.
Thanks, Guy. Yeah, that was great. We had in our last panel, we were talking a lot about the same things, and progressive decentralization came up, and way I even put one thing was that we need to have convenience parity, before we can really approach more mainstream audiences. And so we're making a lot of these
Is
compromises
conven-
in a lot
sorry,
of
is
parts of our
convenience parity?
stack. But what you're saying is,
Sorry,
what's that?
convenience parity, like it has to be just as easy as the centralized solution?
Yeah. But this was more around like some of the other parts of a DAO stack, like Discord and Twitter and HackMD and all the things that people are using every day. We're making some compromises, and I think really the point there is, well, your point is that we can do a lot of stuff already, but there is still a lot of things we can fix if we want to go to a place where decentralization matters.
Yeah, well, okay, so humans, we're not going to ever be on chain, right? But like, I'm not like Discord, the fact that Discord is centralized and Discord could be attacked, like, in my mind, that's not the centralized point of failure that's going to hurt our system. It's we can because we can choose non-decentralized communication systems, then we can just jump to another one, I guess. Um, we're kind of dependent on, we're not in person, so we're dependent on something digital, but more, like a multi-sig is on chain, but a community that's a three-person multi-sig and then, you know, doing signal votes, and their community thinks they're making decisions, but then the multi-sig can make its own decision. That multi-sig is on chain, but that multi-sig is not decentralized. So if we're using a tool that allows decision making to be decentralized, meaning everyone's vote actually matters, then it's much better than the three-person multi-sig. And so just being on chain is not enough. It's the decentralization part that matters, and you can't do decentralization without being on chain.
Right. Yeah. We do these things because they are hard, not because they're easy. And we're getting there. It's getting better. Anyone else have any questions they'd like to
What about
lob over to Sky?
yeah, I got one. What about UI, user interface? Beyond, yeah, I know with DAO House V3, there's a React pack that lets you make forums and such, but thinking about like video games that have, real time multiplayer functionality and stuff like that. Do you have any thoughts on decentralization with systems like that?
Like, can Fortnite operate decentralized? I'm not sure I fully understand the question.
Well, you broke down the parts of a system, and one of them is the front end, right? And so just wondering if there are tools or paths on the horizons to have more decentralized systems around the front end.
So, okay, so the example, I mean, that I'm easy for me to use, that I always use is, for example, Swapper. So the Swapper front end is deployed by some community member on IPFS. It's there. Anyone can access it. It's not dependent any centralized libraries or anything that I'm aware of. And the way you get to it is via resolving an ENS, and that ENS is owned by a decentralized collective. And the only way that you can update or change that front end, which is swapper.eth, is via an on-chain proposal to a decentralized collective. So in my mind, we most likely are going to use swapper.eth.limo, and we're going to, in the easy way, we're going to use eth.limo, which used to use eth.link. We're going to use that, a shortcut, to make it easier to get to to resolve to the front end. And if eth.limo goes down or is censoring, that's a problem. But you can ideally use resolve the ENS another way yourself, or you can actually run your own IPFS node and resolve the ENS to the IPFS front end yourself. But that is, yeah, that is a decentrally owned and controlled front end. And I think more DeFi products and DAO products and things should implement that method in order to own their front ends. But the front end has to be built with that in mind, because it's not easy, but you can't just be dependent on certain services that wouldn't work for your decentralized front end.